I want to share a lesson, a mistake that I believe is dooming our generation right now. And I'm definitely extremely guilty of this mistake myself, which is looking for step by step solutions for absolutely everything. And this is the curse of social media. Social media and the educational content we find online is extremely helpful, but in my opinion, it only takes you from step zero to step one. And the mistake we're doing is the fact that instead of developing our own authentic sense of intuition taken from our own experiences, we try to rely on the advice that people give out online. We try to look for even more step by step advice, even more tutorials for absolutely everything. Tutorials on how to breathe properly, tutorials on how to drink water, tutorials on all of these things that you could just try out for yourself and figure out which approach is the best for your own personality, for your own body, for yourself basically. This logical approach is never going to take you from step 1 to step 100, from level 1 to 100. The only thing that will is your intuition, because we are all unique. Every single one of us is unique. There is no one size fits all advice out there. It's impossible to find something like that. And we are afraid of uncertainty, and being afraid of uncertainty, combining that with being afraid of taking action, results in us being obsessed with receiving step-by-step logical advice. But you've probably tried it out for yourself, and it hasn't worked for a reason. It has not worked because the advice that someone else gives out online is not tailored to your personality. And I can't give you perfect advice for anything, and no one can do that. The only person who can find the perfect approach for your current problem, for your current situation, is yourself. Having that said, logical and step-by-step advice is extremely useful if you're just starting out. If you're getting into a certain sport and you know nothing about the rules, well, you need step-by-step advice because you don't know how it's played. If you don't know how to walk, you need someone to teach you how to walk. Or you need to just try until you kind of figure it out. But if it's something regarding a good way of doing something, like a sport, for example, or like even interacting with people, probably because you have to be adapted to certain situations, certain circumstances, then you need to develop your own intuition, but not before learning some step-by-step rules. If we relate this straight away to social interactions, you could learn some basic principles of social skills. You could learn to kind of talk to people in a certain way, to ask certain questions, but the risk is that if you do this all the time, if you keep computing everything, what's gonna happen? You're gonna look like a robot, you're gonna look like you're not even present, you're gonna look like you are extremely stiff and you are computing stuff in your mind. And when the algorithm inside your mind gives the approval that what that line you thought about is perfectly fine, it's appropriate, you're gonna say it. And you're gonna say it in a soulless manner, you're gonna say it in a very robotical way. And guess what? People notice and they don't like it. Naturally, they don't like it because people want to talk to other people. People don't want to talk to robots. And the human element is essential here. The human element is what defines us at the end of the day. And we try to remove this human element by learning step-by-step algorithms. But that's not the way. That's the difference between us and robots. You don't want to be a robot, you want to be a human. And you probably want to be a human that is able to perform at a certain level, right? Whether it's talking to people, socialization, or even learning a new craft or getting good at something, you want your value to be raised. That requires you to develop your intuition. This gets so overlooked, unfortunately, but if people were to just prioritize their intuition, the entire self-help advice industry would just collapse. Because you don't need a lot of advice to get from 0 to 1, but you need a lot of practice and a lot of experimentation to develop the intuition which is going to take you from 1 to 100. And people are trying to scam us into believing that their advice is going to take us from 1 to 100 or from like 50 to 100, whatever. But it doesn't really work that way. We need to be more human. We need to develop more of this abstract intuition, what's intuition actually? Intuition is basically pattern recognition. Your mind's algorithm to recognize some patterns, to identify some patterns, to remember situations you have experienced throughout your life. So then how do you develop this weird and abstract intuition? By taking action. So if you want to get better at a certain sport, start playing that sport more and more and more and more. When you're just starting out, you rely more on the rules, you rely more on like implementing the step-by-step tutorial you saw online or something, or like the rules someone told you because you know nothing about it. But after a certain period of time, the rules become part of you. You know them instinctively. So then you can start playing with it. Then you can start getting more creative. Same with talking to people, same with every single pursuit of life. But the intuition is only gonna get developed once you take the action for long enough and for a consistent period of time. Intuition has been my sort of like my enemy for most of my life because I was always trying to rely on logic, on step-by-step algorithms that I knew. And that got me some really nice results because I was always extremely rational and extremely logical in my approach for like pursuing anything basically. But what it also did for me is it made me a lot more like a robot, a lot more like weird when talking to people when I was younger, a lot more afraid to show certain parts of me, right? And to act out of my own proactiveness, if that's even a term. But to act with intent, right? Not act directed by someone. Because this is what I was waiting for. I was waiting for the perfect step-by-step blueprint that I could follow in every single domain of my life. And I feel like this is a mistake that so many people are making nowadays. Waiting for blueprints. There is no necessity for a blueprint. Why don't you just step into the unknown? Literally, step into the unknown. Get some data from there, get some information, draw some conclusions yourself, and start using them in your life from now on. It's actually pretty simple. Whatever you want to do in life is pretty simple. You just need a bit of courage to step into the dark. And once you step into the dark, you start seeing more and more light. And you realize that it was not so bad as you thought. Not nearly as bad. And we are meant to live like this, in my opinion. We are meant to be guided by our intuitions more. So be careful to not wait for blueprints and for step-by-step algorithms for the rest of your life, like I did and like perhaps you did. And if this subject is unknown to you so far, if you haven't made this mistake yet, just be careful to not fall into these traps. Because just consuming more and more content and learning more about your problems and how to solve them without actually doing anything won't solve anything. It's just content consumption. You might as well watch Netflix. So hopefully this was helpful for you. See you next time.